Also graduated?
I graduated.
Oh wow, okay, that's really crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Where are you living right now?
I live in the
Yeah, I live in like Eastwood Town, so she's enjoying summer right near Times Square, so she had some there's no way to go. My family's from South America, so it would have been like, God knows.
I mean, I was.
Yeah.
I was in London at the time, so I
Yeah. It lasted like really like 2 hours. Like trades were so delayed that like I think the next trade that was just 40 hours like just
yeah.
The island.
He's a boat.
Take a boat. They're all boats.
which is so
Yeah, because the sun got higher than the policy.
that's really
I'm always thinking of that. I never
I'm not sure which one it was. I always get those things to use.
Hi, how are you doing? Nice to see you. Oh man, I'd love to meet them. Yeah. Can I get them anything? Do you guys need anything?
Oh no, good.
Okay, we're gonna start in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
yeah.
Maryland, you go to
Yeah.
whatever you do, don't go to your topic. We don't talk. We don't get something here. Is that what you stand for? Don't go back. We stay in red line if you need to.
That's a new area. It's called
Yeah, one day like when
You went there? You went to the honeycomb?
I didn't go inside of it, but I went into that mall.
Syria. Wow. Yeah. Or like white people.
Wow, well, white people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because you want to take a bath.
Yeah, well, I mean, not the same, but like, city is like kind of expanding, and I see like certain areas that have that where that people would say like Soria, and everything. It's like, wow, city, like, yeah.
I was going to say, no hurt.
What's your
It's like it's very representative like that art, but I like the song.
It's very
That, yeah.
I dig that song.
Yeah, of course. No, definitely. I don't think it's secure, like, like, we have my next side, so.
Well, yeah, that's the only
Yeah, it's like, yeah, the government, like, it's
Okay. Assalamualaikum. Bismillah. Bismillah walhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So we're going to get started. I hope everyone got to meet some people and introduce themselves and learn a little bit about each other. For those of you who it's your first time here, can we have everyone just move up so that when people are coming in to pray, there's some room for them. So you come in a little closer. That'd be great. Thank you. So we're looking at a text that's called the Book of Assistance. It's by a sheikh named Imam Al-Haddad, rahimahullah, and it's a book of spirituality. We're on chapter 10. If you Google the Book of Assistance PDF, you'll probably be able to pull up the text itself. If you want to take a quick minute to do that. If you don't have a smartphone or a laptop or the book, you can look on with a person next to you, or you can let someone look on with you. That would be really helpful. And so we finished up chapter 9 last week, which was on reflection, which is called fiqh. And we're now moving into chapter 10, which is on following the Quran and the Sunnah. And so before we did that, I wanted to utilize an opportunity to just kind of outline where we're at this point in the text, so that we can kind of see the direction that Imam Al-Haddad is taking us in as readers. And so just purely based off of the chapter headings, right? If somebody can just read to me where it starts so that we can kind of see the pathway that he's giving to us. So what's the first thing that he tells us? Like, what's the first chapter about? Just the subject of the title of the book. Certainty. Right? It's on certainty. Okay? So what he's doing is he's giving us kind of the destination. He's saying this is the way you want to move forward towards, right? Because the idea is that within a pathway identified by spirituality in our tradition, religion in our tradition, the two are not divorced from each other but go hand in hand. We are seeing through a text like this that the way that it resonates and applies is going to be individually distinct, because all of us are distinct individuals. So when he gives us certainty, yaqeen, as chapter 1, he's saying collectively, all of you want to work towards this as the goal for your spiritual path. And why he starts with the destination as opposed to the starting point is because the commonality of a destination is much easier to make applicable to a generalized audience than a beginning point, because you can all work towards the same destination, but we're all starting in different places, right? So the example that I think illustrates it well is that I'm literally standing here in front of you. If I told all of you to get up and walk to me, not one of you would take the same steps as anybody else. You can all see me, but you all see me through a different vantage point. And so similarly, you look towards identifying where you're going rather than where you're starting, because all of us are not starting in the same place. And so he gives yaqeen as that first chapter. What's the next thing that he says? Intention. So you know where you're headed, and before you take steps, you need to know why you're doing what you're doing. You're giving yourself an affirming understanding of consciousness and presence before you move in a direction that goes anywhere. What's after intention? Vigilance. So vigilance, muraqabah, is essentially this idea that even again now, before you move forward, you are essentially looking at what you're carrying. And the most precious part of you that the Prophet ﷺ identifies as the organ of sensory perception that is synthesizing all the information you absorb is your heart, right? ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب. That indeed in your being there's a morsel of flesh. If it's good, everything is good. If it's not good, everything will not be good. Indeed, it's your heart. And so muraqabah, vigilance, is about you essentially watching over your heart so that your heart begins to watch over you. That's what the crux of this chapter is about. So you're going from knowing where you're going, why you're going where you're going, and then you're outlining, hey, what's going on with the most precious cargo that I'm carrying with me? What's after vigilance?
Inner and outer self.
Inner and outer self. Sorry, I know I talk a lot. Let's just write all these down. And then
Regular devotions.
this is called the weird. What else? Reciting Quran.
Acquiring knowledge.
Okay. Remembrance.
Reflection.
Reflection. And then,
Following the book.
right, that's where we are now. There's a lot more chapters ahead, but he's giving you easily digestible points to be able to access and now formulate an entire strategy and trajectory. Is there anything that you can see here that's interesting? Can everybody read what I'm writing? Is it too shiny, like the board? Certainty, intentions, vigilance is muraqabah, which I explained a little bit because most of us probably don't use the word vigilance when we talk. Inner and outer self, right? The journey is not just an external journey, but it's a journey that has inward dimensions and outward dimensions. Regular devotions, what we call the awrad, having a regular litany of recitation of the Quran, du'as that you make, prayers, etc. Reciting Quran in particular, the acquisition of knowledge, remembrance, reflection, we spoke about for like months, right? And now we're moving on to following the book and the sunnah. So they're not intertwined as such that they can be separate topics, but they're also a reason as to why he's putting it together in this fashion, right? He's not starting with follow the Quran and the Sunnah first, but he's giving you an access point that says, like, know why you're reading the book. They connect and build, just like when we talked about reflection, that was a longer chapter than most of the chapters we've looked at, and he went in a certain order. There's a purpose that can be identified that as much as you look at each chapter individually, you want to see and read them all together. Do you know what I mean? So, what does intention have to do with the acquisition of knowledge? What does remembrance have to do with reflection? What does an understanding of the heart have to do with the recitation of the Quran? And religion for us can be very easily kind of existing in a compartmentalized fashion because we engage religion kind of in a very compartmentalized way, right? Like, here's where I'm Muslim and here's where I'm not Muslim. Because Muslim to me refers only to mechanics of prayer, fasting, reading the Arabic of the Quran. It's not a knock on anybody, but an understanding that in certain spaces, that's where like the Muslim thing comes on. And in other spaces, it's not that I purposely lose Islam, but I haven't identified my Islam in a way where it has the ability to be applicable or relevant because I only understand it to be within the framework of what is legalistic or ritualistic, and not like as a state of mind or like an entire way of being. And why that's important is because now when we get into this last point or this new chapter on following the book and the Sunnah, it's not about the Quran and the Sunnah in the sense that we're going to say the Quran was the revealed word of God to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam through the angel Jibreel over a 23-year period of revelation. The Sunnah is the authoritative example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Because the key word here is following. And what it's assuming for the reader is that your ability to engage it with that as the qualification is that you're adopting this as an entire philosophy on life. not an identity variable, right? I'm not Muslim because I was born into it. I'm Muslim because I embrace it. I believe it. It's what I utilize as the basis of my decision making. And so when I'm trying to figure out what it is that I'm trying to do in any facet of my life, I look to these two things, the Quran and the Sunnah, as the standard as to how I will move forward on it. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more detail, but if this somehow separates itself from a conversation on this, this is not going to be a conversation that gets to its depth, because we're going to be looking at it the way that we look at a lot of our religion, right? Like, most of us don't think about how what we eat at night impacts how we pray at Fajr time, or if we pray at all, right? If we pray our Dhuhr prayer on its time, what that means in terms of the demeanor we carry into our homes late at night. How there's connectivity amongst everything, right? Like, how does, in fact, gossiping make it hard to fast? In the hadith where people come to the Prophet ﷺ observing a nafil fast, an extra fast, and they want to break their fast. And the Prophet doesn't give them anything, and then someone intervenes saying it's hard for them. And the Prophet says, tell them to come, and he says, bring a bowl, and then he tells them to induce vomiting, and to their astonishment, meaty pieces of flesh come out. And the Prophet says that they tried to do something halal, but they broke it on something haram, that all day they've been eating the flesh of their brother's back, meaning they've been backbiting and gossiping. And that's what's making it difficult for them to fast, right? Gossiping, not a good thing. Don't do it. But that's not the point that I'm trying to illustrate. What I'm trying to illustrate is that when somebody fasts, how does that have a link to gossiping and backbiting? Do you get what I'm saying? So when you go through 10 chapters of a book and you are in a space where the ability to carry from the initial part of it to the latter part of it is something that's regular, that's how you know that you're retaining it and harnessing it in the ways that it needs to be, right? And it's not that looking at it in other ways is problematic, but we want to start to see how our religion on a whole is not just separate parts that are different from one another, right? That here is Fajr and this is Dhuhr, you know what I'm saying? But the way this entire carpet is threaded together is the way that our life in this dunya kind of interweaves itself within itself. It doesn't exist in patches or separate. It's all connected in some capacity. You literally carry memories with you from the time you were a baby, right? And so too, the way that deen connects is that it actually has to connect. It can't be over here. You get what I mean? Does that make sense? So at this juncture, 10 chapters in, whether you came in the middle or you joined later or whatever, you got to understand that the book is written to be seen also kind of as a whole, and it's not just piecemeal. And so too, pretty much everything that's given to us, they can be separate topics, but our engagement of it has to be regular so that its accessibility is in moments where we can see it through the prism of what we've already learned, and it just deepens for us the meaning that we can draw from it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay. So, really quickly, what I'd like you to do for a few minutes is spend some time just here, and a few people around you. 2 is ideal so that you both speak to each other, right? Why we like groups of 2 is that if you're in groups of 3 or 5 or 10, then it's easy for someone to be silent. And you can be introverted, that's fine. I'm not saying you have to come and stand in front of everybody, but the way that we benefit is by hearing from other people what their thoughts are, and the way that we also benefit is by articulating our ideas and thoughts. I want you to take a minute, the person next to you, no more than 4 people in a group, right? But 2 to 4, and just talk about where we're at right now. And for those of you who have been going through it for some time, how it's been for you so far in terms of application of things. But more importantly for everyone, given that we have new people, come in and out, what do you think is a link between all of this, or even just like certain parts to it? So it's not necessarily what links 1 through 10, but what might link 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, right? But what are some of the connections we can make here and benefit from each other? Or if there's like a group, like how do 1, 2, and 3 all kind of intertwine? But if you can take some time speaking to the people around you, and then we'll come back and discuss as a group. If you haven't had a chance yet to introduce yourself to the people around you, do that really quickly, and then in 5 minutes we'll come back.
reference actually goes back to another definition. And the reflection goes back to the mirror. So as if the inner revolves, then it goes back to the outer.
So you need more chapters. No idea what's inside. Yeah, I mean, these reflections mentioned to create
Okay, so what did we come up with? What did we come up with so far? Who wants to start? And you just say your name when you talk, just so people start learning each other's names. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, my name is Muhammad. So, a couple things. We went through these chapters in bundles. So, Mu'min said, for example, that number 6 and number 7, reciting the Quran and acquiring knowledge, obviously go hand in hand. Then,
Okay.
Then-
Keep going.
Then another point that 1, 2, 3 are address the heart more than the following chapters, up to 8 and 9, which go back to the heart, but in a more structured way. So, and we also felt that it goes from abstract to structured as you go down the chapters.
Okay. Great. Anything else? I heard a lot of voices, so I'm sure somebody talked about something. Yeah, B.
I think you make the case that 1 through 9 are a direct reflection of 10, right? Like how we understand each and every one of those things is rooted in understanding the Quran and the Sunnah.
I feel like these lines I'm making are not helpful. But, you know. So 1 through 9 are a direct reflection of 10?
Yeah.
Okay. And why is that?
Because I think how we understand each of those items, like what is certainty, how do you become vigilant, how do you engage in regular devotion, rooted in understanding the Sunnah and the Quran.
Great. Yeah.
I think we talked about how each of these things are really active processes. It's not something passive. It's not something that happens to you. You have to actively seek out or pursue any of these concepts or things. And they all are steps or ways to better serve Allah's creation and to be of service to yourself and to God, and to be the best version of yourself is a way of serving God.
Great. Anything else? All of you just said those things. Everybody.
Yes.
Maybe like 1 or 2 more people. Yeah.
We
What's your name?
Rahela. We had said that everything ties back to number 2 because like we were discussing how number 7, for example, your intention behind like going into like let's say halakha or going into seeking higher knowledge, like what you want to gain out of it, and what are you gonna do with it?
Great. Anything else? Yeah.
I kind of thought of it as 1 through 5 being lumped together, and then 6 through 9, and then both of those together make up 10. So 1 through 5 is more so Sunnah, although of course it's also talked about in the book, and then 6 through 9 is essentially the book that goes in deeper levels as the chapter goes.
That's interesting. 1 to 5 reflects the Sunnah. And 6 through 9, I'm just saying it out loud in case I'm saying something that you didn't mean, and then you can just tell me I'm wrong. Reflects the Quran. And then what was the last thing you said?
I guess like each number goes into a deeper understanding of what it is.
Great. Anyone else? Last thought? Idea? Yeah.
So, kind of reminds me of Karate Kid, because...
Karate Kid, is that what you said?
Yeah, Karate Kid. Because Mr. Miyagi is telling, I don't remember the kid's name, but basically... Grasshopper. Okay, Grasshopper.
Daniel.
Things.
His name is Daniel.
Daniel.
They didn't name their kid Grasshopper.
I just feel like there's a lot of, like, it's a lot of doing things a little bit before actually knowing why you're doing them and in the process of learning why you're doing it. Kind of reminds me also of, like, I heard this metaphor, I didn't make this up, but when you're growing a plant, you have to soften the soil a little bit and, like, nurture it a little bit before it starts to grow the plant. You really have to work with it. And I feel like for a lot of us, we maybe start reciting the Quran or acquiring knowledge, we don't go to certainty first or intention. Maybe that plant won't grow as strong as sturdy. Sometimes there'll be weak soil or maybe hard soil. So that's what it reminded us of.
That was amazing. And I don't know, starting with Mr. Miyagi definitely didn't make me think we were going to end where we ended. But really good, mashallah. Yeah, right? Like, if you ever have a baby in your life, whether it's your own baby or somebody else's baby, like the baby doesn't just start drinking. You have to teach it how to drink before it can drink what it needs to be nourished, right? You go through a process that can be very frustrating also for the person who's trying to teach the kid how to drink if they decide all of a sudden they're just not going to drink from a bottle or they're not going to drink in this way or that way. But the idea is that pedagogically, like we learn in certain ways. Experientially is one of the ways that we learn. But that was really great. And so, again, just try to understand, aside from like the hodgepodge of like connection lines that I put here, terrible idea. We, in 5 minutes of talking to each other, and then about 7 minutes of just talking back, are able to give a bunch of different insights that can help for us to broaden and attach more purpose and meaning as to why this is something that you want to do very actively and only you can decide to do it, but the measure through which you will determine it is going to be based off of how much weight you give it and the incentivizing that you allow for yourself to apply to it so that you make the time for it. Do you know what I mean? So we can read certain things and hear them over and over, but in order for us to really absorb it or to engage it in a way where it stays concrete and we're able to then take from it like the depth of meaning, sometimes it's not about hearing somebody else talk to you. Sometimes it's about hearing yourself talk about what it is that you've heard over and over. And sometimes it's also just about talking to the person next to you and say, well, what does this look like to you, right? Pretty sure most of us in this room were not landing where that last comment went. And it's not to kind of be unnecessarily like humorous about it, but to understand that it opens up perspectives in certain ways. Do you see what I mean? As did every comment that we got. But if it's just us in front-facing lecture mode always, or we're not doing literally what the book tells you to do, right? It says think, right? It says reflect. And you got to do that on your own. And as an exercise, we do it here so that you go back and you start to do it on your own as well. So now we're going to be looking at chapter 10, which is on following the book and the Sunnah. Can someone start reading from the beginning? Just read the first paragraph. Anybody?
I could do it.
Go ahead.
All right, sure. You must hold fast to the book and the Sunnah. Take refuge in them, for they are the upright religion of Allah, His straight path, and His straight path. Those who adhere to them find safety, profit, guidance, and protection, while those who deviate from them go astray, grieve, lose, or are broken. Let them govern you and control what you do, and consult them in every affair, in obedience to the counsel of Allah and that of His Messenger. O you who believe, obey Allah and obey the Messenger and those in authority among you. If you have a dispute concerning any matter, refer it to Allah and the Messenger. If you believe in Allah and the last day, that is better and of fairer consequence.
Great. Does anybody want to pick up the next paragraph? Go ahead.
Refer it to Allah and the Messenger means refer it to the book and the Sunnah. The Messenger of Allah, may blessings and peace be upon him, has said, I bid you take care of that with which, if you hold on to it firmly, you will never err, the book of God and the book of my Sunnah.
Great. You want to keep going? Just a few more sentences.
If it pleases you to be well guided along the white road in which there is neither crookedness nor curvature, then measure all your intentions, traits, acts, and words against the book and Sunnah, then retain whatever conforms to them and abandon whatever does not. And always be cautious and follow the better alternative. Never innovate in religion, nor follow the ways of the non-believers, or else you will lose both this world and the hereafter, which thing is the manifest loss.
Okay. So, what do we think Imam Al-Haddad is saying here? If you were to take any point out of those first few paragraphs, what is he saying? Yeah.
To use the Quran and Sunnah as like our North Star in life.
Yeah, great. North Star. So, the Quran and the Sunnah you want to use as your North Star. What does that mean?
Your moral compass.
Your moral compass. What are other ways that we can say this?
Your filter.
Guidance.
Constant.
Advisor.
What? Somebody said something between filter and
Guidance.
Guidance. Anything else? Criteria. Like the Quran and the Sunnah are not just text. They're not just sources of law, right? And this becomes a challenge because, you know, when we see these as primary sources of Sharia, and then we translate Sharia as Islamic law, we've already now created within our heads a conceptualization that is consciously or unconsciously equating it to what we are most accustomed to. Sharia is not law the way law is in the United States, for example, in the sense that our most kind of interaction with law here is a system of rules that if you get caught not doing it, there's a penalty, right? So I stop at a red light. If I do not stop at the red light and I go through it and consequently I get caught, then there's a fine. And you can say, like, that's what Sharia does, and it has a technical definition, It has a literal definition that we've spoken about. It's really about getting its practitioner to get to a frame of higher ethical conduct, right? To get to a place where you have an elevation in like morals. You're in that sphere. When we say that you're following the book, you're following the prophetic way, and it's all of these things, this essentially becomes analogous to a philosophy on life, a life strategy. And embedded within that is that you have now made consciously a decision for yourself as to what you're wanting to achieve and what's the way to attain it. That's what Sharia is about. And we've talked about this before. Sharia, tariqa, sirah, suluk. All of these things give us a sense that there's a path that you're moving on. And it's always about movement in some direction. You're not standing still, right? The state of the believer is such, the Prophet ﷺ says, that they change 40 times a day. The one with no belief, they don't change for 40 years. And movement, it goes in whatever direction we want it to go in, right? Just like all of you are facing in some direction, we literally could say to everybody that just turn 90 degrees in any direction, and you all would move in a certain direction, but you'd still be angled in your own unique way. That there's so much room for us to kind of go. And it's not just kind of in this linear way, this one-dimensional way. Remember what we said about the relationship between Islam, Iman, and Ihsan? Right? So if we have Islam on kind of the horizontal prism, from a dimensional standpoint, and it just, that's what you have. You have your pillars, your prayer, fasting, etc. Everything's going to look like a straight line, because all you got is one dimension. Then you add in a second dimension, which is your faith, Iman. And it gives you depth. So the straight line now becomes a square, becomes a circle, a triangle. And then Ihsan is what gives you that depth of perspective. It allows for you to understand that there's deeper meaning because there's actually depth to things, right? There's volume. It's definitely not just a straight line, right? The world is so much more beautiful than that. It's not just even 2 dimensions, but there's 3 dimensions that go into it. And then based off of that hadith Jibreel, time, right? When is the hour? He asks, after he asks, what is Islam, what is Iman, what is Ihsan? He says, when is the hour? Like time becomes that 4th category that brings it all together, right? And so on these pathways, you're not just limiting it again to that kind of one-dimensional understanding of movement, but what we're saying in this chapter on following the Quran and the Sunnah is that the way you move and your decisions, how you choose which of your passions to follow, how you choose which actions to interject into the world. Imam Al-Haddad is saying that essentially what the Quran says is that what you should use for the basis of all of this are these 2 things. This should be the mechanism through which you are formulating your strategy on life. That doesn't happen when you limit Islam to just that one sphere. It also doesn't make it easier for people if you turn it into just a weapon that holds them down, because they're somehow not owning up to what you believe the religion is on its entirety. But for us also, if you're limiting it just to this right here, it's going to be a lot harder to make it applicable to this. And if this and this, the X and the Y axis, are what you have because you've memorized it, rotely. You can spit it out really, really well, but it hasn't gotten to the place where you make those connections that we talked about. There's not the critical assessment or engagement that says that in this scenario, what am I pulling from? On this path, it's not going to give you necessarily specific answers, right? Like, it'll give you a lot, but it's not going to say to you that here is the decision for you. Some of the verses are very clear. Don't eat pork means don't eat pork. But even then, there's certain situations where you have to make a determination that it might not be any of us, and may Allah protect us from ever being in those situations, but what do you do, for example, if you are a Uyghur Muslim in a concentration camp in China, and somebody's telling you that if you do not eat this pork, I'm going to go and kill your kid? Right? What do you do if you are in, God forbid, the situation where the desert is in front of you and you come upon the alcohol and you got to make a decision? That's not likely what some of us have seen, and some of us have maybe seen things like that. I'm not trying to assume. But in most of our decision making, where we kind of falter are in our own individual subjective kind of situations. And it doesn't mean that it's less or more, it's easier or harder, right? Emotions are subjective. Pain is subjective. Difficulty is subjective. Hardship is subjective. You don't have to compare it to somebody else. This is your pathway, right? That's why the starting point was a common destination and not a common beginning, because you don't want to already put yourself steps behind and give shaitan victory over you by saying that something that's heavy is not heavy when it actually is heavy. Make sense? So here, when you're making those decisions, what this chapter is integrating into our psyche that has now gone through pages on just reflection is, hey, if you're going to use anything to make a basis to your choices, then let it be these two things, the Quran and the Sunnah. And we can have this conversation a lot of different ways about what's the relationship between the two and why is one tied to the other, and we can have that down the line. Today, what I'd like to focus on is just this: life strategy, philosophy on life, right? North Star, moral compass. What guides you? What motivates you? What compels you to do the things that you do? The paradox of decision making, right? A paradox within choices is that even when you are not making a choice, you are making a choice. If you are not consciously present in your decision making, decisions are still being made. And within that, you have made a decision. You have said that I will yield to just being my physical self. I'm going to be like the cow that just eats grass and sleeps and has sex. And it's not that food, drink, intimate relationships are problematic, but the physical is not you in your entirety. If anything, the physical is just what's temporary, and it's what is holding the parts of you that are everlasting. And so in the decision-making process, where it goes back to the list we had before, that it is an active process, but it is also individual. That you make your decisions for you. And if you don't know why you're making them, or you're trying to figure out what to base it off of, Imam Al-Haddad, he's saying that, hey, on this pathway, at this point, you should start thinking about how you affirm that the basis of everything that you do, you're going to try to make it the Quran and the Sunnah. When I say it doesn't give you a specific answer, it's not going to tell you, like, hey, is that girl going to really be great for me to be married to? You know, should I become an oncologist or a neurologist, right? What the Quran does for us is that it essentially answers every ethical question that we have in front of us. And it gives us a framework to exert a sense of accountability in our decision making. That's why there is a day of judgment. And may Allah make it easy for us. But at that moment, what you do here is just going to be made apparent to you in every way. And even then, when there wasn't kind of affirming presence in why I'm doing what I'm doing, it doesn't mean that it still wasn't done. You know what I'm saying? And so they're saying that you use this as the basis of your decision making. This is what you have as the philosophy on your life. What do you think of when you think of the role that the Quran and the Sunnah actually play in your lives? Like, how does it come about? Because when we learn, most often what happens to a lot of us is that we either recognize that we need to unlearn certain things, or that our learning kind of got stifled at a certain point, right? My babies, who are 3 and 6, they do not have a strategy on life because they are 3 and 6, right? If you have a 3-year-old who has a philosophy on life, it's just probably not a 3-year-old, right? It's a grown person tricking you in some way. Innately, my 3-year-old can understand God and God's existence. Maybe not God's essence, God's attributes, things that are more detailed, but we don't need to have deep details to have belief in Allah, right? And this verse that Imam Al-Haddad cites that is in Surah An-Nisa, it is prefaced by Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. He's speaking to Muslims in this verse, Allah. Not just people in general. He's saying, you are a person of faith, then you follow Allah and you follow His messenger. The two go hand in hand. What becomes hard in that process is that as innately as somebody can recognize and understand the existence of God, even from childhood, it's not really the same innate process to recognize the existence of a prophet. Nobody sits down when they're 3 or 4. You know, my son is constantly telling me, like, Allah is this, Allah that. I'm like, what? Right? And you speak to him about other things, he's still 3. My daughter is 6. She's pretty sharp, mashallah. But they're not going to get up one day and say to me, you know what, Baba, I think that God sent a messenger to all of us at some point in time, right? I'll be like, we've been living in an NYU dorm for too long, and the weed is definitely interjecting itself through the air. Right? You know what I'm talking? Yeah. So understanding where the barriers come in and the obstacles come in, just in our own innate humanness. I don't have a life strategy when I'm 3 or 6. I have the building blocks that can enable me to get to a place within Islam as the framework that I want to go. But if at 3 and 6 or whatever age that childhood stops all of a sudden, right? You are without it, at what point does it actually interject itself? And not in a way where socialization dictates for us unconsciously why we do what we do. So why we want to connect things, you remember when we talked about maybe a week ago or a few weeks ago, something that was similar, and you all said that parents like make us who we are, and environment makes us who we are, and like this makes us who we are, and that makes us who we are, right? What Imam Al-Haddad says is that firstly, before you take a step, your intention is making you who you are. And why you make muraqabah throughout the journey and you look over your heart so your heart looks over you is because your heart needs to be the vessel that defines and identifies who you are. That you're not just doing because everybody else does, nor are you doing or not doing because it was simply given to you in that way, But the affirmation of it has to come from real conscious recognition that says that this is what I am going to root my philosophy on life on. And then the prayer, the fasting, the charity, the pilgrimage, all of those things don't become an ends, but they're just a means to something. And they're a means, albeit a large means, but still a part of an entire way of being in existence. That then people can equate to certain things, and we see it manifest in different ways. But it has the unique capacity and ability to synergize within any cultural framework and be embraced universally by a person of any race, any class, any ethnicity, at any juncture in time, and is that last message that is for us until the end of time, right? May Allah make the best of our deeds the last of our deeds. So, for us individually right now, where and how we start to think about it like this. Before we say, I'm going to just mesh Islam as being the philosophy on my life or my life strategy, what we want to think about firstly is, what is the point of a life strategy or philosophy on life, right? Because just like somebody told you, likely, if you were born Muslim, that pray your sunnahs before they taught you about the person whose sunnah you follow, it's made it a little bit easier to leave that sunnah. It was that I was following to begin with. You want to have a conscious mode of understanding for yourself what this actually can yield you, like what its purpose is, and where it can be applicable. So I want you to take a few minutes and again talk in your groups just about why is it important to have something that does this for you. Like, what are the benefits of it? And within that, you can also say, what are, like, the detriments, right? Because inherently, like, tools are just tools. How we use them is how we use them. And there can be things that come up that are really hard, right? A God-centric religion doesn't assume that doing everything that God wants you to do is just going to be really easy to do. A God-centric religion says that egocentricity will not give you contentment or success, but it also yields to the fact that God will ask you to do things that you like to do, some things that are hard to do, some things you don't understand why you're doing them. It's about God and not about you. In this, you can gain from looking at it not just in absolutes that it's great, but what comes from it, consequently, both good and bad. And also within that, you want to think about, well, what's the alternative? That if I don't have something that is the basis of my decision making, like what becomes problematic with that? And also there might be gains from it. So we want to think about this in two ways, right? Benefits, detriments, so pros and cons of having a life strategy and not having a life strategy. Make sense? So if you sit down with the people who you were talking to before, or bring in some new people, and we'll talk for like 5-7 minutes about that, and then we'll come back as a group, right? So why is it good? Why is it not good in both frames? I'm still in the middle of this, but so tell me what you want. What do you want?
Am I blind?
No.
I'm trying to see.
I appreciate it. I noticed you.
So
So for us, we still have like programming in our office. We haven't done it. I guess that's a lot of established. So I don't have a direct access to her. Yeah, I mean, I think if you send your staff email, like rather than her directly, they would probably be able to get the they all have multiple people that work with them. So even when they get emails, they're going to pass them on to them. So I would say just see big things. But if I think of something else, I don't have anything.
When you're in this situation, you usually resort to that. So having one strategy it makes a lot of things easier.
The question was, you can start with what's approach.
Well, my question.
I think if you email her to refer you to someone, you probably reach out to that person and see where they can start the process.
Yeah, so literally, how they say my strategy. That's what I
yeah, but these guys go to like hundreds of events. That's like
how you live your day by the way. It's like your iOS, having an iOS. Have iPhone or iOS.
How was it like having an iPhone? You can try it.
I'm saying like having an iOS.
She said it was not for something that would be the best way to or like her staff. I think you should speak to them. I think you should follow what she said because that's the process she's on. But if I think of it, it could be 2 or 3 sessions. I don't know how to say it. I just have nothing to do with it. You know what I mean? Okay, let me know, and I'll try to think of it also.
You need to just work towards that goal.
So having like strategy and how does that affect your life? Having like strategy.
Have a goal, So, I'm actually, do you want to ask this general or do you want to dive into focus on the comments. Not necessarily. Depends if it's a good life strategy or a bad life strategy. If it's a life strategy in general, it's no problem. Unless you're starting yourself, having reflected in knowledge, right?
If the strategy is just designing, you don't like to provide at some point
points that I said, especially if you want to talk about the I want to put the name on my own. But like feelings change a lot. It's not like I do that. It's like there are boundaries. Like, some areas are clear cut, some areas you can look
Is it bad to say they're constant? I don't think they're constant.
I mean, it could be done in a way that it's probably bad to say, oh,
Not something that is normal. Like, that you know, if you believe it, you know it would, but that it always would have a hard time. No matter
Okay, what do we talk about? Who wants to start? So we're talking about benefits and detriments of having a strategy, not having a strategy to your life. Who wants to start? No, I can just like call on people. We can do that. Should we do that? Should I start doing that?
You want to? We can volunteer, Adi.
Yeah.
You have your
volunteer this for you. Did I have my hand up? No.
Okay.
So we kind of like center around like three things. One, brand strategy is fluid and will adjust throughout life.
Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
That's like right smack dab in the middle. If you want to add the neutral column.
What is it? What did you say it was?
It's fluid.
You're the worst.
Fluid. And then just like neutral on top.
I think you're an engineer, right?
I'm not.
Could be.
I do like ad research.
Did you actually answer the question in any way?
Yeah. So for pros, it's like a branch, like a strategy is like your backbone. It's your scaffolding that makes your life efficient and helps you actualize your potential. In a world that especially is like pulling you in multiple different directions, it gives you something to stay focused. But then on the con side, it could be a detriment because you may be down on yourself if you're not following it strictly, or and that could actually cause you to avoid your strategy to begin with because you don't like the feeling it gives you when you're not following it.
Great.
I wasn't concise in the question. So.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So in the Quran and the Sunnah, I feel like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet, they give you so much meaning. They pack so much meaning into like every meaning and purpose into every like second of your life.
Okay,
And-
purpose and meaning.
And that's a strategy for the pro. But then also, like what happens when you don't have this? I would say it's even a pro that like when you just reflect on your life in the past even, and you're like, oh, I didn't really focus so much on this before, and you see like the negatives that happened from that, then that makes when you do have this like proactive strategy, it makes it that much sweeter. So like having a no strategy in the past, like when you see, you know what I'm saying?
I do, but I feel like you're saying it's good because you realize that it's bad. And then
So like if you're always just doing this and then you think, oh, maybe it'll get boring or old to you, but if you always remember like, wow, like what did I do before, and it just makes you never want to do that again.
Okay. Great.
Lesson from the past.
Huh?
Lessons from the past.
No, yeah, I'm not right.
Causes.
It goes in the fluid category. It's not on the board anymore. Yeah. Somebody had their hand raised over here. Yeah, go ahead.
Kind of the flip side of the con that's listed there is when you have a strategy, it's possible to feel prideful about having a strategy.
Okay.
So that would be a con.
Or sense of. That's a con?
Like make people
Like
feel
arrogance.
pride about.
Well, I mean, I'm a pretty terrible human being, so forgive me. Yeah, go ahead. You, then we can just go on the line. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
We said that it might feel alienating at times if that's a con. If you're in a space where maybe you're the only one following that strategy, or there's nobody else kind of, I don't know, joining you along and doing or not doing things.
Yeah. Someone on behind you. Yeah.
So we were talking about in terms of the pros, like how society and times changed so much, like even from like 2009 to 2019, and what could be good now may be bad later, but having like having the Quran and Sunnah to reflect on and using that as your moral compass will keep you on Sirat al-Mustaqim, inshallah. But then with the cons, we talked about how people can misinterpret or misuse religion, and how like certain sins are considered worse than others, like in society in general, and how that can feel alienating.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I'm listening to you. I just want to make sure I write down. Can you say it again?
So the pros or the cons?
The cons. Sorry.
The cons are misinterpretation of religion and like the cultural implications of what it means.
The misinterpretations, cultural implications?
Yeah,
Or
or
those are
like
two separate
culture.
things?
So yeah, sure. So culture misinterpreting the religion.
Some maybe you're gonna say something.
Tina, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, so I guess the pros about having strategies that have a roadmap, and as long as it's your roadmap, not a societal like having a roadmap as well. And the cons are inflexibility, so sometimes when you have a roadmap and you're following it, or something like that, if there's an accident on the road or there's some kind of whatever, you end up being very rigid about it and not alternative backup.
Yeah, and he's going to talk about some of this, right? He cites a verse that says, like, essentially you ask the people of remembrance, right? You ask people of knowledge. Do you know what I mean? But the idea is that as much as your journey is yours individually, like, you're going to need people to kind of help you along the way. And we'll talk about in a little bit something else, but this is great so far. Yeah.
I think having a strategy can give you a sense of contentment and put you at peace with life sometimes, because sometimes you know that you're at least working towards something, even if you're not getting the results you want. You're just moving along that path, and I think just knowing that can be a source of contentment.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Can I add something about strategy?
Yeah, please. It's pretty.
I think that a con, and it like works off of that, a con of not having a strategy is because you lack that consistency in your life, you have this sort of anxiety, and you spend a little bit more time making decisions because you don't have any. Yeah, you have no framework.
Anxiety comes from
lack of consistency. And
because you said you have to spend too much time making decisions?
yeah, you spend more time making decisions because you have no framework to work off of.
I forget how to write certain letters. Yeah, go ahead.
So I have a con for no strategy and a pro for strategy. The con is that you don't have a strategy and you face a problem, then you'll be spending precious time and energy being confused and having doubt, and you may or may not come to a solution, and that doubt and confusion can lead to a very bad place. The pro of strategy is that if you have thought out, if you strategize for multiple variables, whatever problem you face, then it doesn't matter what comes your way, you have a path of action. So you have certainty in faith and also and going back to contentment.
Yeah.
I think an external pro would include, it's sometimes a really great opportunity for dawah. I found that so many times when I've been with my coworkers or non-Muslim friends and I'll do a certain thing because I know that that's what the Sunnah teaches or what the Quran teaches, people will ask like, oh, why'd you do that? And I'll explain my religion teaches me this, and I feel like that's a step forward into solving certain issues of misinterpretation that people have, and being able to see the daily normal actions that we do based on the Sunnah and Quran versus the normal public information that everyone knows about Islam.
Yep.
I think that just because the pros for no strategy is empty, there could be an argument that having no strategy allows you to be more flexible, because having a strategy, like someone said that you can be really rigid or judgmental, this allows you more flexible and also maybe more curious and learning about other people's perspectives, other people's roadmaps, other people's plans, and it allows you to absorb information more.
Great. Yep.
I also feel like for no strategy, you have this false sense of independence and confidence that you're not being swindled into something that you aren't fully sure is guaranteed.
A false sense of independence?
Yeah.
Is a pro?
Yeah.
The independence.
It's probably just the independence.
It's just the independence, but for us, or at least for me, it's a false sense of independence.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I think we were kind of talking about who would want to have a no strategy would be a pro. You think about people who are spontaneous, also people who want that instant gratification, who are not patient. Some people don't have the patience to have a long-term strategy, they want it now.
Okay. Yeah.
I wasn't really here for the whole thing.
It's okay. Some people were here and still didn't really know what was going on. They're wearing a blue shirt in the front row.
The way I see it is, what Meg said, it's not that we've been outnumbered, it's that we've been out-organized. So I see organization as the concept of the dunya. We always organize to achieve a greater purpose in this world. But the way I see Jannah and Jahannam is that our entrance is really inverted, is the entrance is the exit. So the way I see it is sometimes we make istihara to understand we don't have knowledge, only God got knowledge. So by having no strategy, you put your iman 100% in God.
I'm gonna try to think of how to write that, but I will. Yeah. Somebody, like, you had your hand raised?
Do you have objections?
No. Yeah.
I have two for strategy, one for no strategy. Pro for strategy is you have a greater sense of being prepared, you're a little bit more prepared for the unknown. The con is not everyone will agree with your strategy. Probably gonna end up getting into a few fights over it.
Okay.
The pro for having no strategy is that you're probably looking for one.
Okay. Maybe we take two more. So just, I didn't mean to be kind of rude. I think, whatever. But when we have a space like this, with as many people here, still an understanding kind of the guidelines of the space is that it's not really about people articulating and then we get to kind of deconstruct in the prism of right and wrong, but we want to be able to listen and hear from everybody because there's a lot of benefit that can come in that regard. And so just in that frame, hearing people's like kind of ideas and thoughts and letting it kind of sit for a little bit so that our initial reaction to it might not necessarily be where it needs to be, but when we're able to let it simmer, it'll make sense a little bit more. Let's get like two more people, I think. Yeah, we just do two right here and then we can go. Did you not want to be called then?
No, it's okay.
Why'd you raise your hand?
I chickened out after a while, but it's okay. So for pro for not having a strategy is that it's kind of freeing, and then for the a con for having a strategy, well, it's not really a con. It's just that sometimes it's followed like based on fear because you're scared of the consequences.
Okay. That was great. You should speak all the time. Go ahead.
So I was thinking, as a pro, it could be, it's an intentional way of living your life.
Okay. Great. There's a lot here. You want to say something? Are you sure? No, go ahead. It's fine.
So I guess like I work in the healthcare field, so I was looking at it from that perspective, to add on like source of contentment or more so acceptance. Let's say when somebody gets diagnosed with something, it helps them maybe look at it through a deeper meaning, understand that through their patients or the way that they deal with it, that it could be a test from God to see how they react to it. But then the con, which I also see, is some people will take that as a more passive approach to their illness, and they will just accept it as this status quo that, oh, God wanted me to be like this and not pursue treatment or not follow your advice. And I think that's also a con.
Great. So, like full disclaimer, I think it's good to follow the Quran and the Sunnah, in case anyone was wondering. But that's just like my disclaimer. The way that we kind of understand this, if we were to say, well, what was a prism that many of us were looking at it in, was likely also in the framework of the individual, right? But me having a strategy that I fall into, like a life strategy, right? Not the parameters being the Quran and Sunnah only, but just having some structure to like why I live my life as a broader frame before we narrow it to say, well, should that strategy be then the Quran and the Sunnah? We don't live kind of independently, but we live interdependently. And where and how everybody can have some of these things creates what kind of now experiences when we are coming from different backgrounds, for example, right? So your liberation might lead to my subjugation or persecution if it is the I that is you that is seeking its freedom, so to speak, because we don't necessarily kind of fall into each other's consciousness in the ways that we need to when we're making decisions on how our way of living impacts indirectly or directly the way somebody else's life might be. I'm not saying it's bad or good, but just to be able to think out, for example, where the exercise is beneficial, but where it's not all-encompassing or exhausting. I say to you, think about this if you were the mayor of a city and you had to decide how everybody in the village is going to live together coming from different backgrounds. We talked about this through the prism of just you, like what works for you. And then you talked about it together, but for most of us, that framework was me as an individual, kind of working in a certain way. You now add complexity to it, right? Because God is your God and my God and our God and the God of everything, right? SubhanAllah. But to create a system and a set of processes that enables there to be some semblance of morality and ethics when everybody's so different, and moral relativism lends itself towards a place that it breeds inequity, right? It breeds hatred. It breeds racism and bigotry. Because somebody gets to decide what's best, but they do bring a lot of the I into it that isn't necessarily applicable to a broader we, based off of things like power, privilege, that stem from supremacy, patriarchy, etc. Make sense? The other thing that I wanted to say, just drawing on here, right? There are points that go across the board. And some of these are pros and cons in that way, right? Some of them are also like fears. Some of them are things that say that it's not easy to kind of do certain things, that it can be hard. And that's why our deen is about principles also, like mercy and compassion and love and being supportive, right? The believers, men and women, are supporters of one another, right? That's what this book also says. You read the book in its entirety. So somebody is trying to just move forward. You're not hammering them down with the sunnah. Because the sunnah is not about like hammering people, right? It's about giving them a sense that they actually are going to be able to keep walking and moving forward in some capacity. And there's a lot of like deep stuff going on in here that we might on our own struggle with, or some of us might not have ever felt, but it's important for us to understand, right? Like, what if you are the only person who's doing it and it makes you feel alienated or marginalized? It's not easy to be the only person of your background in a certain space. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's really hard. It can be really, really tough. Being in a space where everyone won't agree with me in terms of what it is that I do. Or like hating on myself because I identify myself through a prism of the mistake. The Quran and the Sunnah, like, it has answers for a lot of these things in the ways that we will be immediately receptive to it because it's just very apparent. And much of this also stems from looking at things that we've looked at already and taking from it even more, like, deeper meaning from it. I can't say across the board, but I would say some of these challenges and some of these pros probably are not stemming from text in and of itself or a guiding framework, but it's coming from the way Muslims have treated us, the way we've kind of been engaged in certain spaces. And that's okay. That's not a good or a bad. It's bad. You shouldn't mistreat people. But like conceptually, it's not a bad thing. But again, we're saying what we're trying to follow in having the Quran and the Sunnah now as a life strategy or the basis of our philosophy on life, as hard as it might be, is that you separate what people do from what Allah does and what His Messenger alayhi salam has done or continues to do. And that can be hard, but at times becomes necessary. So why does Imam Al-Haddad talk about acquiring knowledge or reading Quran? After he talks about having a wird, in which he says part of your wird can be reading Quran, he then has an entire chapter on reading Quran. Right? Reading Quran and reading Hadith and learning it and engaging it is not my Islam came to me from somebody like judging me when I walked into a space. It impacts us, definitely. But it's still like a different point. And it's not a conscious mode of engagement of the system. It's still being imposed in some way. Does that make sense? I want you to sit with this a little bit and spend time between this week and next week and just saying, well, like, for me to reinvent what the entire system means, right? Whether I'm born into Islam or a convert, and it's likely a lot different for people who are converts, but for those who are born into it, it doesn't even resonate as an identity variable always consciously. It becomes an unconscious mode, right? But the familiarity that comes from having people who have gone through similar life experiences has a gain and a benefit. It can't just be, though, that outward experience. It has to be inward out and starting to reflect deeply on where it kind of starts so that you can say, well, why do I see it in the ways that I see it? And ultimately, even if it's not this as a system, the Quran and the Sunnah, what becomes the basis of what I do, right? And I know me, you know what I mean? I've done some like dumb stuff in my life, right? Do I really want to be the one that's telling me why I want to do what I want to do alone? Accountability is in this, it's embedded in it. And that's also really hard. And that's why a lot of people, they wrestle with Islam, because it's not just like love, 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 you know what I mean? But it's saying, no, like, you did it, you got to deal with what comes after it. You get to like gain the good from it, but also like the problems that came from you, they came from you. Like, you decided to do that. Don't push it on somebody else, right? And so it's there, and it's hard to kind of deal with at times, but it's something that is still prevalent. We're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail. I want you to just like take a mental picture of this, see if you can kind of sit with it, reflect on it. My daughter's started reading Cam Jansen books. Does anybody know Cam Jansen? Yeah, right? There you go. Cam Jansen, 6-year-old book, or maybe not. But like Cam Jansen has a photographic memory. So when she wants to store something in her memory, she just goes click and it sticks in her head, right? It's not meant to be an entertainment session that we're coming here every week. It's meant to be something that we benefit from each other, and then we increase, inshallah, in our hikmah by acting upon what we know and then reflecting on it so that we're growing and we're learning and we're moving forward, right? You need to have some type of basis for decision making, whether it's just your nafs, like your body, your desire, your passions, your exhaustion, your stress, whatever it is. If nothing else, what you want to take away from this chapter is Imam Al-Haddad is saying that you want to be consciously a part of deciding why you're doing what you're doing. And then, as a person who wants to increase and find contentment, the Quran and the Sunnah, he's saying, is going to get you to the places that you want to be at. It's going to give you safety, profit, right? He says it in the first paragraph. So for those who adhere to them, they find safety, profit, guidance, and protection. While those who deviate from it, they go astray, grieve, lose, and are broken. And so also within that, again, if we yield to it, and I would say as the disclaimer I followed, that like having a relationship with God doesn't make you like stop being sad, because then you wouldn't be human. But having a relationship with God can still give you strength. It doesn't have to make you walk on eggshells, and can give you contentment in ways that other systems don't necessarily. Where we just have to relearn some of it, or perhaps have an honest conversation that says that what he brings into the next sentences, that maybe the way that we're doing it isn't the way that it's supposed to be done, or the way that it was given to us isn't the way that it is in its entirety. And that's okay, because then I can take a step back and look at it differently and say that I need to now kind of engage it in a different way, so that I'm not saying the system is problematic, but my engagement of it might not be like where it needs to be. Does that make sense? And it's just over and over and over. That's what our life is. Choices, decisions. Choices, decisions. You can't run away from it. And the most common thing that I'm comfortable saying generically that walks into my office is that people have no idea how to make decisions when it comes to it. They're always looking for somebody else. What does Islam say about this? Islam says that you make your choice. Don't look for a verse to blame it on if it doesn't work out. Islam says that you make your decision. You say over and over, Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, guide me on the straight path. And the grammar there is not saying that God, just point a finger and I'll go, but it's saying, kind of walk with me, like lead me through it. And in response, Allah says, وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ in Surah Al-Balad. So you ask to be guided to a path that's straight. And Allah says that I brought you to two najd, essentially a crossroads. And then the verse after it says, فَلَقْتَحْمَ الْعَقَبَةِ. Essentially, you're not going to make it through the aqaba, right? That you're not going to get to the place of relief or sustenance. That in kind of a classical mode of understanding, that place is referring to the valley that exists between two hills, or the summit of a mountaintop. That in the tafsir of that verse, what they say is that when people were seeking sanctuary, that's the place that they would go, relief from harm. And the verse is saying that you're not getting to the relief because you get to the crossroads, you don't know how to make a decision. You don't know how to stand on your own feet in terms of what you believe or what your convictions are. That's why you can pray the way somebody else prays and fast how someone else fasts and dress the way somebody else dresses. You can't believe it just because somebody else believes it. It comes from here. And then tiredness and exhaustion sets in because you have the same conversation in your head for days, weeks, months. You just don't know how to make a choice. And it's so frightening, right? I had a guy that came to my door and he said, we were having a dinner. He said, hey, we're having dinner at the IC tonight. And I was like, yes, I know. And he said, I'm helping to set up. I was like, mashallah, that's great. And he's like, we don't have any cups. And I said, oh man. And he said, what should I do? I said, maybe go get some cups. But he was petrified, right? And you can be like, well, that is not something I would do. But I would say it as your brother who loves you. You do it all the time. You might just not want to admit it. You get scared to make choices. And you don't want to have that. Do you know what I mean? The system that's the Quran and the Sunnah is not just giving you the ethical framework or the guidelines, but you're relenting to the idea. This is why we start with reflecting on God and His attributes, etc. That there's a God who wants nothing less than the best for you and from you, that is giving you this system for your gain. Not as like a mechanism to push you down, but as a way to say that here's how you can really be brought up in every capacity. And that's hard because a lot of us are not taught religion that way. It's just systems and do's and don'ts and haram, haram, haram. And then the challenge is we pass it on to people in that way, right? But if I find strength through it in its entirety, and I am not saying the relationship with the Quran and the Sunnah is just that the Quran says pray, and that the timings of the prayer and the mechanisms of the prayer are based off of the guidelines of the Sunnah. I'm also saying the Quran prohibits alcohol, and the Prophet shows us how with compassion he walked with somebody who drank. Do you get what I mean? It's not just that the ritual is what we extrapolate. We do. We also extrapolate like ethics, values, how to interact with people. And so sit with some of this between this week and next. And the next week we'll start going through it where he talks about other systems, what we call a bid'ah, like something that is added or innovated, and what that means more broadly speaking, and kind of try to get through the rest of the chapter. Okay, so tomorrow Sheikh Sahib is going to be doing his halaqah here, 6:30 till around 8-ish, Maghrib-ish time. And then Dr. Murmur will on Wednesday and Sheikh Faz on Thursday. A lot of people have been reaching out to us because either they themselves or their family members are going for Hajj this year. Right? May Allah accept it from them and us. And grant us all the tawfiq to perform the pilgrimage in our lives. And they're not going with our group, but they're saying, are there ways for them to connect to our group, resources, etc.? We've been doing online seminars and webinars that we're not publicly advertising, but they're all on Facebook and YouTube. We'll have some in-person ones. So if you know like somebody wants to go, feel free to connect them to us. We're happy to share like packing lists and book lists, and they can come and be and ask questions. When we're there, it's really hard to connect, especially on the Hajj days, because everybody's just separated based off of the package they bought, the kind of visa they have, this kind of stuff. Our professionals group is hosting an open mic soon, and if you want to perform or be a part of it, they've been sending out emails. I think the deadline to sign up for that is coming soon also, inshallah. And then this Friday, last Saturday, we did a halakha in the park with Sheikh Sahib Webb. Did anybody go to that? It was oh, okay.
Sunset Park. Yeah.
Was it nice?
Yeah.
Yeah, it went well.
Yeah, very.
Did you guys go bowling too afterwards? How did that go?
It went good. I mean, I was okay, so.
He paused for a long time.
Well, now that everyone wants to go, based off of that
Don't base your experience off of my.
Can you talk about a little bit how it was, the halakha part? Because we're doing another one on Friday.
I mean, it was good in terms of it was interactive. So
Yeah.
like people, they asked a question and then we each separated off based off our answers. We talked amongst ourselves and we talked amongst people that had different answers. And then Sheikh Sahib Webb then gave the interpretation of based off of some Sunnah or Hadith that would confirm or deny, not confirm or deny, but answer more clearly people's answers.
Great. So it was in Brooklyn at Sunset Park. We're going to try to do like more events in the outer boroughs as well as outside of Manhattan, given that so much of our community is not central to Manhattan, even though our center is central to many subways and other things. So I think this coming weekend, we're doing it again in Central Park. Was there food this past time?
No.
No?
There will be food according to Aziz though.
There will be food. Last time there was supposed to be, but this time there will definitely be, inshallah. So come. I think a lot of people that come, there's still room to RSVP. It's kind of open. It's a good way to kind of engage the community, kind of get to know more people. I think it's Friday night in Central Park. I could be wrong, right?
I think 6.
6 o'clock in Central Park on Friday, yeah. And if you want to know the exact location, because Central Park is huge, just RSVP through the website, and we'll send that over to everyone. Great. Does anybody have any other announcements, things they want to let people know of before we break? So we had people get together for iftar and dinner 2 weeks ago, and then last week we had like a group of people that met up also. I think it was kind of a little bit more loosely done last week, and people didn't know where to end up. So I had some people afterwards saying that they're not really familiar with the location. So anybody interested to meet after for iftar or dinner, what we'll do is once we pray Maghrib, if you want to come, just you can hang out in the lobby near the elevators, and maybe we'll make a plan and go from there rather than having everybody go separately and meet up separately. Does that sound fun? Great. Okay. Jazakallah khair. So we'll see everyone next Monday. We're going to pray Maghrib in a few minutes for those who want to stick around. The building is closed right now, so if you leave, you're not going to be able to get back in. Just make sure you take all your stuff with you. We'll see everyone, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah khair.